play the mridanga. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yashoda Nandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Nitai Gaur Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe. Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe, Jaya Radhe. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, ISKCON Sanstapakacharya Srila Prabhupada ki, Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
So today we're studying the Srimad Bhagavatam as part of our Scientific Saturdays, and we're looking at Canto 7, Chapter 7. There's two verses, 19 and 20. We'll chant together verse 19, which is on the board. Yeah. Atma,
Atma
Nityo,
Nityo
Avyaya,
Avyaya
Shuddha,
Shuddha
Atma Nityo Vyaya Shuddha,
Atma Nityo Vyaya Shuddha
Eka
Eka
Kshetragya
Kshetragya
Ashraya,
Ashraya
Eka Kshetragya Ashraya,
Eka Kshetragya Ashraya
Avikriya
Avikriya
Swadrik
Swadrik
Hetur,
Hetu
Avikriya Swadrik Hetur,
Avikriya Swadrik Hetu
Vyapaka
Vyapaka
Asangi
Sangi
Anavritaha,
Anavritaha
Vyapako Sangi Anavritaha,
Vyapako Sangyana Sangyanavrita
Atmanityo Vyavashuddha
Atmanityo Vyayashuddha
Ekakshetragya Ashraya
Ekakshetragya Ashraya
Avikriya Svadrighetur
Avikriya Svadrikhetu
Vyapaka Sangyanavrita
Vyapako Sangyanavrita
Atmanityo Vyavashuddha
Atmanityo Vyayashuddha
Ekakshetragya Ashraya
Ekakshetragya Ashraya
Avikriya Svadrighetur
Avikriya Svadrikhetu
Vyapako Sangyanavrita
Vyapako Sangyanavrita
Atmanityo Vyayashuddha
Atmanityo Vyayashuddha
Ekakshetragya Ashraya
Ekakshetragya Ashraya
Avikriya Svadrikhetur
Avikriya Svadrikhetu
Mahatusi Vyapako Sangyanavrita
Vyapako Sangyanavrita Atmanityo Vyayashuddha Atmanityo Vyayashuddha Ekakshetragya Ashraya Ekakshetragya Ashraya Avikriya Svadrikhetur Avikriya Svadrikhetur Vyapako Sangyanavrita Vyapako
Sangyanavrita
Atmanityo Vyayashuddha
Atmanityo Vyavasudha Ekakshetragya Ashraya
Avikriya
Svadrikhetur Vyapako Sangyanavrita Atmanityo Vyavasudha Ekakshetragya Ashraya Avikriya Svadrighetur Vyapako Sangyanavrita Atmanityo Vyavasudha Ekakshetragya Ashraya Avikriya Svadrighetur Vyapako Sangyanavrita. There is a next verse, I'll just chant. Etayar swadashabir vidvan atmano lakshanai parai aham amitya sadbhavam dehadau mohajam tyajet. So the synonyms. Atma, the spirit soul, the spirit soul, the part of the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
The part of the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Nitya,
Nitya,
without birth or death.
without birth or death.
Avyaya,
Avyaya,
with no possibility of dwindling.
with no possibility of dwindling.
Shuddha,
Shuddha,
without the material contamination of attachment and detachment.
without the material contamination of attachment and detachment.
Ekaha,
Ekaha,
individual.
individual.
Kshetragya,
Kshetragya,
who knows
who knows,
and is therefore different
and is therefore different
from the material body.
from the material body.
Ashraya,
Ashraya,
the original fountain.
the original
Foundation. Avikriya,
Avikriya,
not undergoing changes like the body.
not undergoing changes like the body.
Svadrik,
Svadrik,
self-illuminated.
self-illuminated.
Hetu,
Hetu,
the cause of all causes.
cause of all causes.
Vyapaka,
Vyapaka,
spreading throughout the body in the form of consciousness.
spreading throughout the body in the form of consciousness.
Asangi,
Asangi,
not depending on the body,
not depending on the body.
meaning free to transmigrate from one body to another.
Free to transmigrate from one body to another.
Anavrataha,
Navita,
not covered by material contamination.
not covered by material contamination.
Itai,
Itai,
by all these.
by all these.
Tvadashabi,
Vadashabi,
12.
12.
Vidvan,
Vidvan,
a person who is not foolish,
a person who is not foolish,
but fully aware of things as they are.
but fully aware of things as they are.
Atmanaha,
Atmanaha,
of the spirit soul.
of the spirit soul.
Lakshanai,
Lakshanai,
symptoms.
symptoms.
Parai,
Para,
transcendental.
transcendental.
Aham,
Aham,
I.
I
I am this body.
am this body.
Mama,
Mama,
mine.
mine.
Everything in relationship with this body is mine.
Everything in relationship with this body is mine.
Iti,
Iti,
thus.
thus,
Asat bhavam,
asat bhavam,
a false conception of life.
a false conception of life.
Deha adau,
Deha adau,
identifying oneself with the material body,
identifying oneself with the material body,
and then with one's wife, children, then with one's wife and children,
and then with one's wife and children,
family, community, nation, and so on.
family, community, nation, and so on.
Mohajam,
Mohajam,
produced from illusory knowledge.
produced from illusory knowledge.
Jajet,
Tyajet,
must give up.
must give up.
Translation. Atma, in inverted commas, refers to the Supreme Lord of the living entities. Both of them are spiritual, free from birth and death, free from deterioration, and free from material contamination. They are individual. They are the knowers of the external body, and they are the foundation or shelter of everything. They are free from material change. They are self-illuminated. They are the cause of all causes, and they are all-pervading. They have nothing to do with the material body, and therefore they are always uncovered. With these transcendental qualities, one who is actually learned must give up the illusory conception of life in which one thinks, I am this material body, and everything in relationship with this body is mine. Before we read the purport, there are little footnotes to 3 of the items in the verse, in the synonyms. Ashraya, the original foundation. Without the shelter of the spirit soul, the material body cannot exist. So that's referring to what that ashraya means. The next one is avikriya, not undergoing changes like the body. Prabhupada notes, as already explained, the fruits and flowers of a tree take birth, exist, grow, transform, dwindle, and die according to seasonal changes. But the tree, through all of these changes, remains the same. Similarly, the Atma is free from all changes. And the next one, Svadrik, self-illuminated. One does not need to make the soul prominent. It is automatically prominent. One can very easily understand that in the living body there is a spirit soul. Now the purport. In Bhagavad Gita 15:7, Lord Krishna clearly says, Mamivangsho jivaloke jiva bhuta. All the living entities are part of me. Therefore the living entities are qualitatively the same as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the leader, the supreme among all the living entities. In the Veda it is said, Nityo Nityanam Chaitananam. The Lord is the chief individual living entity, the leader of the subordinate living entities. Because the living entity are parts or samples of God, their qualities are not different from those of the Supreme Lord. The living entities have the same qualities as the Lord, just as the drop of seawater is composed of the same chemicals as the great sea itself. Thus there is a oneness in quality, but a difference in quantity. One can understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead by understanding the sample, the living entity, because all the qualities of God exist in a minute quantity in the living entities. There is oneness, but God is great, whereas the living entities are extremely small. Anor, Aniyan, Mahato, Mahiyan, from the Kathopanishad 1:220. The living entities are smaller than the atom, but God is greater than the greatest. Our conception of greatness may be represented by the sky, because we think of the sky as being unlimitedly big, but God is bigger than the sky. Similarly, we have knowledge that the living entities are smaller than atoms, being 1/10,000 the size of the tip of a hair. Yet the quality of being the supreme cause of all causes exists in the living entity as well as in the supreme personality of Godhead. Indeed, it is due to the presence of the living entity that the body exists and bodily changes take place. Similarly, it is because the Supreme Lord is within this universe that the changes dictated by the material laws occur. The word eka, meaning individual, is significant, as explained in Bhagavad Gita 9:4. Matstani sarvabhutani nachaham teshvavastataha. Everything, material and spiritual, including earth, water, air, fire, sky, and the living entities, exists on the platform of Spirit Soul. Although everything is an emanation from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one should not think that the Supreme Lord is dependent upon anything else. Both God and the living entity are fully conscious. As living entities, we are conscious of our bodily existence. Similarly, the Lord is conscious of the gigantic cosmic manifestation. This is confirmed in the Vedas. There's a series of aphorisms quoted here. Yasman yo prithvi chantariksham vigyataram adikshena vigyaniyat ekam eva dvitiyam atmajoti samrat ihovacha sa'imam lokan asrija Satyam Jnanam Anantam Asango Yayam Purusha Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnam Eva Vashishyate. All these Vedic injunctions, actually, we're just translations aren't given to these, but a couple of them are recognizable. Yasmin Yo Prithvi Chariksham. Basically, in him is gathered heaven, the earth and the space, the antariksha between them. I'm not sure what the next one is. Ekam eva dvitiyam is he is one without a second. Atmajoti samrat ihovacha is something along the lines that it's said that this light from the Atma is the supreme. Sa imam lokan ashrija, is basically Krishna creates all the worlds. These are the worlds that he has created. Satyam Jnanam Anantam. Prabhupada quotes this one directly, and he says, Lord Krishna revealed the indestructible spiritual effulgence, which is unlimited, conscious, and eternal. Asango Yayam Purusha. The living entity has no, and this is again quote from Prabhupada, the living entity, a living being, has no intimate connection with the material world. The soul is always pure and uncontaminated by material attachment. And the last one, you recognize, Purnasya Purnam Adaya Purnam Eva Vashishyate, from the Upanishad, yes. All these Vedic injunctions prove that both the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the minute soul are individual. One is great and the other is small, but both of them are the cause of all causes. The corporally limited, that's us, and the universally unlimited, that's Krishna. We should always remember that although we are equal to the Supreme Personality of Godhead in quality, we are never equal to him in quantity. Persons with a small fund of knowledge, finding themselves equal in quality with God, foolishly think that they are equal in quantity also. Their intelligence is called avishuddha buddhaya, unpolished or contaminated intelligence. When such persons, after endeavoring hard for many, many lives to understand the supreme cause, are finally in actual knowledge of Krishna, Vasudeva. They surrender unto him, Vasudeva Sarvamiti Samahatma Sudurlabha. Thus they become great Mahatmas, or perfect souls. If one is fortunate enough to understand his relationship with God, knowing that God is great, Vibhu, whereas the living entity is small, Anu, he is perfect in knowledge. The individual exists in darkness, and when he thinks that he is the material body and that everything in relationship with the material body belongs to him, this is called ahammama. Janasya mohayam ahammameti. This is illusion. One must give up this illusory conception and thus become fully aware of everything. Atma nityo vivyashuddha eka kshatragya ashraya avikriya swadrighetur vipako sangyanavrata etar dva dashabhir vidvan atmano lakshanai parai aham mamait yasad bhavam dehado mohajam tyajet. Atma refers to the Supreme Lord or the living entities. Both of them are spiritual, free from birth and death, free from deterioration and free from material contamination. They are individual, they are knowers of the external body, and they are the foundation or shelter of everything. They are free from material change. They are self-illuminated. They are the cause of all causes, and they are all-pervading. They have nothing to do with the material body, and therefore they are always uncovered. With these transcendental qualities, one who is actually learned must give up the illusory conception of life in which one thinks, I am this material body, and everything in relationship with this body is mine. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Salakaya Chakshurudmilitam Yena Tasmai Hare Krishna. This is a very deep purport, a very full and a very important aspect of what is being described, what Prahlad learned in the room from the instructions of Narad Muni. And the key thing for us is this first word, Atma. Obviously a great favorite of mine, because everything revolves around this in our preaching. This is who we are. This is who God is. Atma doesn't just refer, as it says here, to the living entities, it also refers to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, because they share the same qualities. And what this first verse 19 is, these are the 12 features or lakshana, the characteristics of the Atma. And it's an incredible presentation of the nature of consciousness. And I just want to put this in context of what we've been discussing. Previously we explained through philosophical examples and psychological examples, how we could very clearly appreciate that although the brain works according to physical functions, those physical functions are not sufficient to explain the nature of the experience we have of our mental content, qualia. So the mind is obviously a different function, it is a different set of properties to physics and biology, which make up the activities of our brain. So we need to postulate mind in order to explain the nature of our qualitative experiences. But even that is not enough, because we need to postulate the existence of that which is directly conscious, the witness, the seer, that which is aware of the content of mind. That is a different function entirely. And that is what is being described here in this verse. That's the entity that we're now going to call the Atma. Previously we argued, as a way of a discourse with philosophers and scientists, that we have to look at these completely different functions, because they get upset about substances, you see, and objects. But so we argued for the moment, just think of them in terms of functions. But at a certain problem, you've got to realize you've got issues with trying to explain where consciousness comes from. And what I thought I'd do is just where have I got them? Yeah. Great. Oh yeah, no, I've got them here. Yeah, I've noted a few problems of phenomenal consciousness. A famous philosopher, Michael Tai, who works with Stanford and has written the Stanford's Encyclopedia entry on consciousness and quality and all that, noted there was 10 major problems that he saw with consciousness, or explaining consciousness. And of course, he explains these 10 problems and then says, well, I've got an idea, which he calls panic, which is very appropriate because that's basically where the scientists are at with consciousness, panic mode. But his idea is that simply consciousness is a representation of the external world. And in one sense, that's right. The mind represents whatever is the reality out there to us in terms of what it is presenting in our mind. So it's presenting the external world. So in one sense, it is representational. But just because mind is representing, just because a picture might represent a scene, doesn't mean that the picture is conscious and aware of itself. And that's the point that all these guys make. And that's why we said they keep diminishing what consciousness is down to the representation rather than to the ability of the individual to illuminate and be aware of that picture, the seer. There is a nice story, and I'm not even sure if it may even belong to Shankaracharya, but it's useful for our purposes. It's about a guru who says to his disciple, "By what light do you see?" And the disciple goes, "Well, by the sun during the day and a lamp at night." And the guru says, "By what light do you see the light of the sun and the lamp?" The disciple thinks, "Well, I suppose by the light of my eyes." And then the guru says, "Yeah, but by what light are your eyes able to see? What is making where's the seeing coming from?" So this is an ancient analysis of the same process that we were discussing through neuroscience. And the disciple then thinks, "Oh, by the mind. The mind is the light by which the eye can see, because it ultimately has the pictures of the world." And the guru says, "Yeah, but by what light do you see the mind?" And the answer, that's consciousness. That's the soul. That's this word, Atma Drik, self-illuminating. In other places it might be called Atma Drishya. But it's the same principle, that the soul is self-illuminating. The only light is the soul. But because in the material world, we are trying to understand what's around us through the mechanisms of our mind and our material senses. Therefore, we think we require sun and moon and light in order to illuminate stuff. But consciousness is self-illuminating. Hence, in the 15th chapter, what's the verse? After Mamai Vangsho Jivaloke quoted here, the next verse, or is it done before it maybe? It's one before it, I think. 15th chapter.
Everything is self-illuminated in the spiritual sky, the planets, there's no fire needed, no electricity.
Yeah, Nashashanko Napavikaha. We don't need the Nasuria, we don't need the sun, we don't need the moon, we don't need... and we kind of think, yeah, that's kind of cute. You know, there must be some kind of light going on. But what actually you've got to understand is that consciousness itself is the light. Consciousness sees. It's not a question of things having to be illuminated externally. It is atmadrik. You are self-illuminating. We're going to discuss that in more detail next time when we actually talk about the kind of mechanics by which the Atma experiences. So, but the point is that what we're being given here are some incredible characteristics which address these problems that the philosophers see. For instance, ownership is a problem. How come I feel my pains and I don't feel yours? So that's considered to be one of the philosophers' questions. And of course, it's very natural. I am the Atma in this body, and I am, it's also mentioned here, pervasive. Which is that one? Avikriya, is it? No. Vyapaka is pervasive throughout the body. Kshetragya also. I am the knower of this body. So, and then the big problem is what's called perspectival subjectivity. How is it that whenever I experience anything, I'm experiencing it from the position of being me doing the experiencing? Oh, what a difficult question. Maybe I'm the Atma. Maybe I'm the conscious thing doing the experiencing. Full stop. Sorted. And this also addresses, I don't know if I mentioned previously, Dennett's. Daniel Dennett is the arch denier of consciousness. And one of his arguments is that if you've got inside your head, if you need mind to understand outside, do you need another mind to understand that mind, and then another mind to understand that, and then another mind? Is it a kind of infinite regress of little men or little minds going back on and on forever? Because they don't understand there is a buck. The buck does stop with somewhere. And it stops with the Atma, Atmadrik, with the consciousness. We don't need to propose that something else makes us conscious, because the understanding is that consciousness is the primary characteristic that we have. How do changes in the brain account for my phenomenal experiences is the big problem. You know, how can just little, ions jumping between my neurons really account for any type of consciousness? It doesn't. It may represent data about the external world. It may influence how the mind represents the external world to us. But it certainly doesn't account for my phenomenal, either the qualities of my mind, the qualia, or my ability to experience those. There's another one is the knowledge argument. I don't think I've mentioned this one, the knowledge argument. This is the story of Mary, who had some pretty lousy parents who are neuroscientists, and they decided that their little baby, when it was born, was never going to experience any colour. So they painted everything black and white in the room. They painted even her kind of lips, and everything was white, and they only fed her white food. And she grew up, but very intelligent, because they were, materially intelligent parents. So they gave her all the black and white books, no colour photographs or anything. And it's not a true story, by the way. This is a thought experiment. These guys, you wouldn't get away with this. But she became the most brilliant neuroscientist. And she knew everything about how the eye was able to convert the wavelengths of light into, different receptors, and how that went to the brain, and exactly where in the brain the wave patterns were kind of created and everything like that. So she knew everything to explain the phenomena of colour. And then one day, her rotten parents left the door unlocked. And she was able to escape from this black and white study that she had been cooped up in her whole life. And suddenly she opened the door and bang! She was seeing a world of colour. And she would go, what's all this? What is this experience I'm now having? Now, the philosophers argue. Some of them take this point that, and they call it knowledge, which is the big problem, between them. They call it the knowledge argument. They say, she obviously now knows something more about the world than she did before. Because previously she knew that there was this thing called colour, and she could explain how it happened within the physiognomy and the processes of the body. But she didn't know what it was like to experience colour. So has she gained new knowledge? That becomes the argument of the philosophers. Some say, obviously she does. This is something new. And others say, well, no, it's still the same thing. But really, this is an experience difference. You cannot say it's the same experience of what she thought colour was. This is a new experience. It is fundamentally different. It has its special qualities. So that's the Mary's Room thought experiment, which is a very kind of popular one when you read philosophy of mind and things. And then one of Michael Ty's next questions is, how come in introspection, when we actually think about what we're experiencing, all we get to are qualia? That's a big, we don't actually get to the world, we just get to the qualities of our experiences. Yeah, that's because you are the Atma. And all you're able to experience of what's out there is the qualitative representations of the world in your mind. So all these questions are properly dealt with, and we'll see them, how they appear here. And another one, a conceivability argument. This is about zombies. The idea is that, is there, and I think we mentioned something along those lines because one of the other philosophers last time mentioned this, David Pearce, that could there be something which is an absolutely functional duplicate of you, down to the last bit of DNA, down to the last cell, down to the last neural pattern in your brain, absolutely the same, without being conscious. So this is one of the ways that, and it's the argument either way for trying to say that zombies could exist, and therefore this indicates consciousness is something different, or arguing against it, I think is not useful. I don't tend to use that zombie argument. But what is interesting is that the public have a natural understanding that zombies are different. That somehow or other they, and you can go around slaughtering zombies because there's no ethical issue in it because they're not conscious. It's actually very interesting that, a lot of popular films and shows allow us to go and just slaughter zombies as if it's, nothing, no issue, no ethical issue on it because of no consciousness. But a better meditation is these shows which show either zombies or robots or entities which have been claimed to have no consciousness coming into consciousness. And it's a bit like Mary opening that door into the room, into the world, and seeing something new. You see these kind of robots going, oh, 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 and becoming aware that they're aware. So, anyway, these are all the different problems that the foolish scientists and, who are under the misconceptions of aham mameti, I'm this body, and trying to explain their existence, their consciousness, their experiences in regard to the body. This is the mess they get into. But what this verse is saying, no, none of that works. But here is a proposition that actually deals with all these problems that you have in philosophizing about consciousness. Why won't you just take it? It's so simple. Consciousness is not a product of the brain. Consciousness is not just the mind. Consciousness is the seer, the observer, the witness. And we will define consciousness. This is the prime entity who is conscious, and it's the prime self beyond any identification with his body. It's the individual, as mentioned here. It's the personal entity composed of and possessing a quantum of consciousness. And the Bhagavatam always is not just trying to help us understand our own consciousness, but understand our own consciousness in relationship to Krishna. So this purport particularly focuses on that aspect, that we share all the consciousness characteristics of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but only in minute fashion. And they're interesting because some of them give us what actually appears to be great power. So 12 features of the Atma as given here. And let's think of them particularly in terms of us as individual beings. The first one, Nitya, without birth and death, eternal. We are the observers of the passing of time. Therefore, we are not changed by time, ever. In fact, we are outside of the processes of time. This, I think, is when we are discussing the nature of consciousness, we can discuss it that it is part of the spiritual energy, but in many ways, the simple point, what's the difference between the spiritual energy and the material energy? The material energy is subject to change because it is under Kala manipulating the gunas. Because Kala manipulates gunas, the material stuff changes. Spirit is the observer, the svadrik, the permanent entity. It is not changed by Kala, it is not a product of the gunas. So the difference when we talk about consciousness is to discuss it that it is outside of time. And that's the meditation. Deyanosmin yata dehe, that the body is changing, but I'm not. I am the constant observer. And that's why the philosophers then say, well, no, you're not. You're constantly changing. No. My attitude, my personality, my outlook, the content of my knowledge may change, but the self as the seer, the prime self as the seer, that is constant. So that's why Nitya, Avyaya, with no possibility of dwindling. Can't be dwindled. It once in existence, you never change. Because there's nothing to dwindle. You're a quantum of consciousness, you know. There's nothing that you can, there's nothing about that can dwindle. There's nothing about it that can change. Shuddha. And that I've got written here with, but it's without the material contamination of attachment and detachment. Eka, individual. Eka. We talked about that the challenge, we quote this statement by John Searle. The challenge for explaining consciousness is to explain unified qualitative subjectivity. Eka, unified subjectivity. I'm experiencing myself as an individual. That is my state now. And according to this verse, that is our permanent state. This is against the Advaita impersonalist idea that somehow or other we simply merge, and oneness is it's one single consciousness. No, Eka, individual. Kshetragya, we are the one who knows the body. And because I am the knower of the body, as Prabhupada points out in the synonyms, therefore I understand myself to be different from the material body. I am different to that which I know. Ashraya, the original foundation. And it's nice that Prabhupada gives a little extra on that. Which he says, without the shelter of the spirit soul, the material body cannot exist. Krishna we recognize as the supreme Ashraya, because it is from Krishna that all reality comes. We can't say, oh, I'm the Ashraya, I'm, the source of all existence, No. But this is where the Bhagavatam is being generous, and Prabhupada often presents it in this way, that it is because of the spirit soul that the body functions. Now that's not absolutely true. It's only because of the Paramatma functioning, that the body functions. However, the Atma present within the body, we give it credit that it activates the life airs and so on. It is the life force of the body. And that's a very good way of modeling it and explaining it. We don't need to bring in the theological aspect that ultimately, which is balanced in these, that in one sense, the soul does nothing. But at the same time, it's been called hetu, the cause. It's causal, but it is not the doer. Material body is the doer, but the Atma is causal. It's an agent. Why? Because of our desire, because of intention. Consciousness does everything just with intention. The whole spiritual world operates on Krishna and the devotees and their intention. Just from their intention, everything happens. Doesn't mean they don't move. It doesn't mean that things that aren't no, all the pastimes are enacted simply out of intention. That is real hetu. It's just that in the material world, there has to be this very complicated setup by which intention is translated into the manipulation of the material elements, the movement of our bodies. That is facilitated by Krishna. So that's why some of these other ones, like the Asangi and the Anavrata, that Anavrata is not covered by material contamination. Actually, the Atma is always 100% ontologically distinct from matter. But we're deeply entangled in it. And that's a subject I want to explore through a number of the analogies that the Bhagavatam give in the next class. But from this verse we understand the actual soul is not contaminated by matter, it is not changed by matter. In one sense, we're not affected by it. We are asangi, we do not depend on the body for our existence. And one aspect that Prabhupada points out is not depending on the body means we are free to transmigrate. There's one, and I think it's in this section here in the 7th canto, where the statement is that the one power that the living entity has in the material world is the ability to take another body. That's our power. And we have abused that power almost unlimitedly through all the different species. But that's what we've been up to. But we don't undergo changes. Svadrik, we are self-illuminated, and Hetu, the cause of all causes. We are causal in that our desires are being reflected and facilitated by Krishna. The verse is mentioned, Nityo Nityanam Chaitanas Chaitananam. The Lord is the chief individual living entity, the leader of the subordinate living entities. And the next line of that is Eko Bahunam Yovadadati Kaman. That this one entity, the Supreme Personality, is for maintaining all the many living entities and facilitating their desires. So maintaining us and facilitating our desires. That's what Krishna is doing. But we're being given the credit of, as we are in the spiritual world, we are Hetu. We are causal, we are an agent, we are a player in the spiritual world. And we are given the illusion of that here in this material world. So we've got a few sheets, not many, but hopefully copies can be made of those who want. Each of these 12 characteristics, I think, can be related to the 3 prime characteristics of consciousness: Sat, Chit, Ananda. The understanding of Sat as our beingness, Chit as our knowingness, and Ananda as our experience on pleasure and lovingness. So in the Sat category we have Nitya, our eternal existence. Avyaya, no possibility of dwindling in our existence. Ashraya, we are foundational, we are that which gives cause to other things. And Avikriya, we are not covered by material contamination. We are, an eternal spiritual being. In the Chit category we have Eka, the individualized aspect of our knowingness. Kshetraga, we are the knower of that which is around us. Because we are Swadrik, we shine our light of consciousness. And within the body, we're shining it on the body, and therefore we're aware of everything that seems to be happening within it. Vyapaka, we spread our consciousness. This is consciousness in terms of chitta, which I'm going to explain more on next time. This